If I can reach at least one person that can relate to this story and she gets out, you know, then it was worthwhile.
Welcome to the Voices for Change podcast, Active Voices, where we highlight the stories of people who are actively working to change the way we talk about intimate partner violence. Joining me today is Kate Ranta. And Kate was the first person to respond to a request for survivors of intimate partner homicide attempts that I made online in 2014. So it's been 6 years. Kate was the first person to respond. She was also the first survivor that I interviewed. And now she's my first podcast. So that all feels right to me. You know, feels like the world is one with the universe. So thank you, Kate, for being a part of this journey. Tell us a bit about how you got here.
I was in a very emotionally and psychologically abusive marriage. We had been together for about almost 3 years when things really started to escalate. And unfortunately, I didn't really know what emotional or psychological abuse even was. It was so subtle and insidious, the things that he was doing, that I didn't even realize what was happening until I was knee deep in it. So I finally, got up the courage to leave, and that actually put me in much, much more danger. I had moved to an apartment that I had not given him the address to, and he stalked me there. And it's actually going to be 8 years, November 2nd, this year. He ambushed my dad and me at my apartment, and he shot both of us twice right in front of our 4-year-old son, William, who is now 11. So we all survived, and, it just brought us on this crazy roller coaster of aftermath. And, you go through this abuse, and then this big tragedy happens, and it doesn't end there. So I had decided to really share my story and speak out, right from the start. And I believe that somebody had posted on my public page about your project, Finding Jen's Voice. I think that's how it happened. And I read, your query, and I responded right away because I knew it was a project I wanted to be involved with, and, that my story would have an impact. So.
Well, your story has certainly impacted a lot of people who have seen the film, but also you've participated widely in lots of advocacy efforts with efforts against gun violence, and you've been interviewed by the Huffington Post and NPR and Rolling Stone magazine, and rock star victim, right?
It's pretty surreal how all of this has unfolded, but
yeah. So, I mean, our viewers should see this. There's your book.
Yeah.
This is a really emotional and intimate look into your relationship with your ex-husband. And you took a lot of risks in writing this book and sharing this information, and you continue to take emotional risks that have not come without payment for you. I mean,
no.
You've had lots of fallout around coming out and telling your story. Why is it so important to you to keep telling your story?
I think because, there is pressure, I think, after a major event like what happened to us, to kind of move on and let it go and don't think about it. And you hear a lot of those sort of platitudes along the way. And yeah, it's going to be 8 years. So it's like, isn't enough enough? Should I not talk about it? And I've gone through all of that. I have taken breaks. I've taken steps back, but I think I get a lot of encouragement really through my Facebook page. Every time I share just even a little tidbit of truth, I get a lot of responses of, this could be me, or I feel the same way. And thank you for saying the things that I want to say, that sort of stuff. And it's like, I've always had opinions. I've always had things to say about things. Why would it stop with this? This could have been prevented. I feel very strongly about that. And it wasn't okay. There were all kinds of things leading up to this that could have prevented this from happening and didn't. And I just made it my goal to get that out anywhere and everywhere possible. So, until it runs out, until people stop asking, as long as I'm being asked, I'll keep telling it.
Well, thanks for that. Because I feel like your story does really help people recognize abuse in their own relationships. And I think that there's so much value in hearing from other survivors and other victims of abuse, rather than hearing it from an outside story. The personal connection, I think, is very real.
And that was like that was what was behind the writing of the book too, because I had been sharing my story in bits and pieces in, various, advocacy forums online, but I really wanted like a centralized one place where from like beginning to end, all the raw details, all of it included in one place. I mean, it was never about like, I have to be like on the New York Times bestseller list and I have to sell all of these books and make a whole bunch of money. It was just never about that. I went with a really small publisher, and my co-author, she's also a survivor. After interviewing me for a compilation book she was working on, she wanted to help me with this. And so that's how we got it off the ground. So it's like kind of survivors helping survivors. So, this is just something that like we have forever now. We have this book and the truth about what happened.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of the emotional benefits to speaking your truth, to telling your story? Is it connected to healing?
It is. I really feel strongly that had I gone a different route, it would have been much, much worse for my mental health. I know that there's plenty of women that aren't, comfortable telling their stories, and that's fine. It really is personal and it's person to person. For me, I really was so angry. I was really angry for a lot of years, and that was where a lot of the sharing came from. Like, I want everybody to know that this happened and why. I'm in a different place now mentally. I think I'm more at acceptance, and it took a long time to get there, like accepting that this happened. And I do think that speaking out had a lot to do with that healing. Just, getting support from other people when I tell it, and not feeling alone, even as I'm telling it. At the very beginning, when I didn't know a whole lot of people that had been through this, I really felt like a freak. I did. Like, how am I ever going to be a quote normal person ever again? I absolutely had that feeling. And by telling it and having others come out and say, me too, it happened to me too. And it just helped incredibly.
Well, one of the things that I tell people when I talk about the making of Finding Jen's Voice, I say that probably the most powerful takeaway for me was the power in having survivors tell their stories and watching transformations. Mm-hmm. You were pretty far, even though you were only a couple of years out of being shot, you were pretty far ahead in terms of doing advocacy and
Yeah.
telling your story, and you'd already had some pretty significant publicity at that point. But most of the women that were part of our Survivor Sisters group, there were 11 of you, most of them had not had that experience. And for some of them, this was the first time they'd ever publicly talked about what happened to them. Every single person came away from that experience saying, I feel better. I feel stronger. I don't feel alone, which is a big piece of it.
That's a big piece.
But also, I kind of watch people go from victim to survivor to, in most cases, advocates, where the experience wasn't something that happened to them anymore. It was their experience that they owned,
Right.
and really used that to kind of take control back of their lives, to do it on their own terms.
Yeah, and I feel like our documentary and the women that are in it, everybody, it really is a case study in how different people process trauma. We come from all different walks of life. We all had differing experiences of domestic violence and trauma. But the one thing that always sticks with me was when we were filming and when you said how different all of us were, but that the men all seemed, it could be like the same guy, basically. And that's terrifying.
It is terrifying. And one of the things that I remember, and I actually had to go back and look at my notes. I interviewed 35 women over the phone before I brought the 11 of you together, right? So, and everyone I started by asking the same, first few questions, and I was taking notes, and I have a whole thick notebook of my interviews with people. 27 out of the 35, when I asked you to describe your first impression of your abuser, 27 out of 35 used the word charming in that description. He was so charming. He was my Prince Charming. He charmed the pants off of me.
Saved the day, the rescuer. That was mine.
Yeah.
He was the rescuer.
Right. So it really, that was the first whoa, aha moment. This is a type.
Yep.
This is somebody who uses their charm to manipulate.
Yep. And I think the other thing that they do is I think about my first date that I had with my ex, and I could picture us sitting in the restaurant, and I can still see his face. Looking back, I realize he didn't talk that much. He more listened to me and asked questions and was I think gleaning information from me to learn more about me and possibly to use things against me later. Because back then I was super open, trusting. I would tell everybody anything about my life. I didn't, that's changed.
Yeah, although you do tell people some pretty amazing things about your life.
I do, yeah.
For sure. Well, I think that the work that you've done and continue to do, it makes such a huge difference for people who are going through the experience, and also people who are on the outside of it and just don't understand it. One of the things that you say in your book is, I kind of did it right. I just left, right? Everybody says, why doesn't she just leave? I just left. And then I really was in danger. And yeah, and I recently spoke with Dr. Jackie Campbell, who's in the film, the rock star researcher in the world on domestic violence, and she, it's clearly true that most homicide attempts happen after she just leaves.
Yeah, because they're losing control and power.
Exactly.
That's exactly what had happened.
And there's so much to unpack in this whole topic.
Yeah.
And, you know, I always said finding Jen's voice was just kind of a snippet, just a little piece of the information. But that meant that we didn't get to tell your whole story. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but our on-camera interview lasted like 3 hours.
Yep. To tell the story. And that was one of the first times I had really sat down and told it, like from beginning to end. And I mean, I remember my face being just like bright red and hot. By the end of that, it was so hard.
It was
much harder than I anticipated.
I always say I
Yeah.
could do a whole film on each one of
I was
you.
going to say you probably could have done a series on everybody.
Yeah. And I'm that's kind of what we're doing right now though, so
Yeah.
part of doing these podcasts is to go back, revisit with everybody, and let's get some updates about where we are now, and just hear some more from you, because you all have so much to teach us.
Yeah. Well, I guess the one shining thing in my story, which is a little different, actually a lot different than a lot of far, far too many other survivors, is that we did see justice. At the time when we filmed, he was just in jail in Fort Lauderdale. But in February of 2017, we finally went to trial. It was like 4.5 years altogether. And he pled not guilty. The jury didn't buy his defense, and he was found guilty on all 5 charges, I think, against him, and then sentenced to 60 years in prison, which is life for him. So we did see justice, but it's rare that happens, sadly. Very, very rare. Far too many that I know that are out in like 10 years.
Yeah.
For murder.
for murder. Yeah. Attempted murder. And, of all of you, of the 11 of you, only 3, I think only 3 of the perpetrators
Right.
went to jail, and 1 committed suicide.
That's right.
So 7 saw no
They're
justice.
out there somewhere.
And they're finding other victims.
That's the problem.
Victims don't really know they're victims until it's too late.
Right.
That's the big message around Voices for Change. Is if you recognize the signs, if you really understand what a healthy relationship is and is not, you can avoid this, because what we know is our society is not going to save you from it.
No, the systems that are in place to save us are not. I would shout that from the rooftops. They will not. And I can't tell you how many people reach out to me and are like, within this situation, in the middle of it, and want my advice. And it's horrible, because I feel like I can't give advice because nothing worked for me. Like nothing kicked into place until the worst had happened, which is sick.
Yeah.
The systems are broken. They're broken. And family court, forget it. They can't recognize an abuser from a victim, and if they do, they victim blame. So it's horrible. We're not protected.
No. And we need a movement.
We need a movement.
We need a movement, and so we're creating a movement. And we're launching a campaign today for Voices for Change called Raise Your Voice. And it's really it's not putting the onus of change on survivors. It's giving the power to change to survivors. That was the reason for creating Voices for Change. It's what we continue to do, and we're really grateful to have your voice be part of this.
Learn more about Kate's story and find the link to order her book, Killing Kate, at her website, KateRanta.com. And please follow us at voicesforchange.net, where you can learn more about preventing intimate partner homicide. Thank you.